Hey, this is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite films. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just like they've been to us. With that, Alex, what is our topic of the day?
Yeah, so the topic of this episode is movies that shaped our fears. Yes, spooky and scary. But speaking of scary, this just the caveat to this list and this topic. This wasn't a list where we're coming up with the scariest movies we've ever seen or the movies we've seen and then couldn't sleep for days. I mean, we definitely could do a whole episode about that. There's certainly films that filled me with fear in that sense. But this is not about scares. This is more about fears in life. What are the dreads or the paranoias we've had throughout our lives, or maybe something that develops later in life? And what are the movies that best capture these themes of, it could be existential fears or more physical fears? Which movies sort of capture those things in our lives? So that's definitely how I approach my list. Just thinking, okay, what are the things that I am, paranoid sounds kind of like I'm crazy, but what are the things that do kind of make me afraid, or things that are just so overwhelming sometimes when I think of these things? Like, oh my God, like this is terrifying to me, but not in the sense of like go boo terrifying, or like Dracula coming for me, which can be scary. But that's how I approach my list. So I have a couple different of these fears that I'll talk about when I get to the movies, and there were for sure movies that definitely exemplify those. And when I watch it, it makes me think of those fears every time I see them. What about you?
Pretty much the same, actually. The only thing I would add is that for me, like, it's not even about when I see these movies, just like a mention, I wouldn't say a mention, but like anything that is connected with these movies, particularly the score, is enough. I think music is very powerful in that sense.
Right.
It can kind of take me in that headspace of not just watching the movie, about all the thoughts that I've had that are sort of, dread related, that come back to me pretty easily. So yeah, this is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to delving into our deepest, darkest fears. Why don't you kick us off? What is your number 3 movie that shaped your fears?
All right. So my number 3 is a movie called A Face in the Crowd from 1957, directed by Elia Kazan, starring Andy Griffith, Patricia Neal, Anthony Francois. I'm butchering that name probably. But quick logline from IMDb: a female radio reporter turns a folk singer drifter into a powerful media star. So I put this movie on my list because for me, this movie is sort of the fear of greed and fame and what that can do to us, but also really how the system feeds on it. The whole obvious Trump connection is very much real, but I think to me this is really more about the system at large. How somehow somebody has decided what the success metrics are, and then everybody is sort of a slave to it. Like in this context, the success metrics are ratings essentially, and everybody is sort of a slave to that in some way or the other. It's a tale of honestly very lonely and mostly selfish people. But I think what's great about the movie is that you see the humanity of all these people, because that's true about humans too. All of us, like, we are greedy, lonely, selfish at some level or the other, but we are still very much human. And I think the movie does an amazing job of sort of playing with your own sympathies, because they shift from person to person, because at any given point somebody is taking advantage of somebody else in order to sort of get that feeling that they are succeeding per those success metrics of that system. But then of course the system eventually spits you out, and you're sort of back at the same place where you started. In many ways, this movie made me think of Del Toro's last film that you had on your list, Nightmare Alley, in a
Yeah.
way that,
Yeah.
you're sort of back at the same stage. All these people end up over there. So yeah, this fear for me has really always been there. I remember even as a much younger person when 9/11 was happening and like terrorism was sort of so rampant and such, and having conversations with my parents and other friends about sort of what is going to happen to us as a society, as a
Hmm.
world, and are we all just going to succumb to you know these systemic forces, and that's just all going to be how it all ends up. To, of course, Trump times where all this was very real, literally to the point of ratings and his obsession with ratings, and it sort
Right.
of became like a very literal manifestation of it. But I think to me, this dread has always been there, at least for me, and it's been there in at every sort of level. You can pick any industry, you can pick any company that you might be a part of, you can look at the country level or at the global level or the climate change level, whatever you want to look at it. It's the same principles of sort of how these systems are built on these weird success metrics, and everybody is sort of a slave to it. And yeah, some people are worse than others, but really everybody is in it in some form or the other. And I think that fear really, to me, kind of comes down to the fear of not being able to do much about it
Hmm.
either.
Hmm.
What is the way out? You can sort of in your own way think about, okay, I'm going to live this way, I'm going to make these choices, but you're also part of the system. You can't stand outside of it really either. So I think there's a little bit of that fear for me of sort of helplessness as well, or just ignorance, if you
Hmm.
will, and sort of just walking along. So yeah, that's why this movie's on the list. As the movie, like this is such a nail biter. I mean, I know you mentioned that we're not really talking about movies that have jump scares and such, but
Right.
the first time I watched this movie, I sort of felt like I was watching a horror film.
Mm.
That
Hmm.
first moment when what's his name, Buddy or Bud? What's his name? Lonesome Road. Sorry, not Buddy.
Yeah.
I don't know why I thought of Buddy. When Lonesome Road, like the first time, like watches himself in the camera
Mm.
and seeing what impact that is having, and there's just a look in his eyes. There's nothing more horrific to me when somebody sort of realizes that, and then what's going to come thereafter. So I mean, on that note, just brilliant performances, such a great narrative structure. The storytelling is so incredible. The score,
Hmm.
everybody just nails it. And yes, it's about all these themes, but it's also actually quite entertaining, if I could say that. Like, this
Yeah.
is not a movie that's like hitting you over the head. I mean, I guess it is at times, but it's done in such a way, and I think the credit goes to the performances and just the screenplay, really, that it's still a very entertaining watch. Like, yeah, it makes you think. It's it provokes you, but it's still entertaining. So yeah, that's Facing the Crowd at number three.
Yeah, no, this is a film that I've wanted to watch for a long, long time. I just never got around to it.
Mm,
And I everything that I heard about it in terms of its status as a masterpiece in film just was all true. Like I really, really like this movie, and I definitely connected with it on a lot of the same levels that you were just talking about in terms of the
yeah,
the it's the system that enables someone like Lonesome Rose in this film to rise to the level that he is, and then have control. I'll say it over people, or at least of important voice over
mm-hmm.
this swath of the country. And what's so fascinating about this movie, I think, and Andy Griffith's performance, is that you don't is his whole you can't really tell, like, is this whole story a lie or not? Like, what is
Right.
true about what he's saying about this small town that he came from? He keeps referencing he's from this small town, even though does it even exist? What is really his background? What is really his motives too? Which is, I think, is what this movie does so well. Like, it's not saying, oh, he's in this to try to become, the president so he can take over. It's like you don't really know what he's doing other than just he craves attention, and it
Mm-hmm.
almost feels like he keeps making his decisions in this film on what's going to give him, the biggest audience, because he just wants that attention. And actually, you mentioned this at the beginning of your analysis here, and I actually didn't think about it until you said this, but you said about some lonely person. I mean, his name is Lonesome, for God's sakes. Like, oh,
Yeah.
that's why they call him that. Like, he's this guy who is very, very empty. So he's
Hmm.
created this persona for himself just to get attention and get fame, and then yes, money too, obviously. But I think it's not really the fame I'm sorry, the money that he really craves. It's like he's trying to fill some void inside of him
Hmm.
with this attention from other people. And yeah, the powers that be are using him then. Like he gets exploited by the system and those in charge to then, he's the end of the film, like he's giving advice to a political candidate who
Hmm.
clearly is, set up as someone who has very, bad, like sort of capitalist conservative ideas, who's not really helping the people, but he's trying to use this Lonesome who has a great connection to the masses of the poor and thinking that they can control them, right? And even though they don't agree with the policies of who this candidate is, like, oh, you just get
Right.
Lonesome to say he's good, and then boom. So it's not really like Lonesome even has like a political agenda. It's just he desperately wants to have some kind of connection. And the sad thing is, in a way, is that his empty pursuit of fame is pushing the people away that actually are could be important to him, like the
Yeah.
woman, I can't remember her name, who's in love with him throughout the film, but
Yeah.
she pushes her, or he pushes her so far away by making choices, marrying somebody else because that's what he thinks will give him
Gosh.
better
Yeah.
story, right? So yeah, which why the ending I actually felt was very horrifying in a way. It's like he's alone and screaming out for
And
some
crazy,
and
probably.
crazy, yeah, because he has nobody, and that's what the
Yeah.
success has gotten
Yeah.
him. So I think, yeah, the movie is, especially when it was made, and just the fact that you can watch this today and it still
Yeah.
feels just as biting and critical of the system, and making a lot of allusions to Trump and other. There's a bunch of media figures you could also talk about in the same light as similar to like Lonesome Roads, but yeah, it's like I think just that's a testament of this film, that it can stand
Yeah.
up and still be so relevant. I mean, I guess it's also scary because things haven't changed, right?
It's scary, but in some ways, it also sort of, I don't know, in a weird way, I've watched it a few times now. It sort of also calmed me down that I think
Mm,
we as a society, we have this thing that whenever something like this is happening, we sort of act as if it's happening for the very first time.
true.
And, that, oh, what have we done? Or what has this person done? Versus it's actually not about one person. Like
Hmm.
this is Taylor's all his times. It's been going on for a long time, and you can be scared about it, but I think there's some catharsis as well, that this is just the nature of the beast in some ways. Like isn't life kind of a cyclical system as well in some ways, so
True.
yeah.
Yeah, true. Though I think about it as the beast isn't necessarily like humanity or human nature. It is an economic system that is
Yeah.
relatively new, honestly. I mean, modern capitalism's really only been around for 150, 200 years. And I think that is what we're
Yeah.
trapped in today and what this movie is showing. And my hope that I have is that, look, this is something that was created by man, and it can be dismantled and changed by man too at some point, because we are all caught up in it.
Yeah.
But it's not something that is, going to be with us forever, because it wasn't with us forever. And if it
Exactly.
wasn't there all the time, then that means at some point it's going to go away. But yeah, I was really impressed with this film all around. It reminded me of another film that is around the same time, Ace in the Hole. I don't know if you've seen that. It's
Yeah,
a Billy
similar,
Wilder film,
similar.
very similar about the media and how, again, profit motive and all this stuff. But no, I think this also speaks to a lot of my fears too. So I was glad to finally see it. It's something I'd wanted to see for a very, very long time. Was totally blown away by it. If anyone listening has not seen this film, definitely watch it. Even though, yeah, I think it scared me in the same way that you were talking about, just the system being out of control.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. What's your number three?
So my number three is the movie I have on my list that is not so much an existential fear, but a very practical and physical fear that I have, that actually this movie contributed to in a major way. So the film is 1990s Arachnophobia, directed by Frank Marshall, starring Jeff Daniels, Harley Jane Kosnak, and John Goodman. The plot summary is: a species of South American killer spider hitches a lift to the U.S. in a coffin and starts to breed and kill. So like I mentioned in the outset of this, this is something that does a fear that I've had of spiders. I'll just say it of spiders. That this movie, honestly, as a child, I was afraid to even see this movie. Just because of the poster and the name. And this, I was 8 years old when it came out. I remember seeing it in video stores. And I had always sort of had this, primal fear. There is something innate in humans that are afraid of certain types of things. Reptiles, a lot of people have fear of snakes or, sharks. And these are all things that, yes, obviously there are practical reasons why you should stay away from snakes and spiders and sharks, which maybe is why it's sort of, I feel, built into DNA. I'm just someone who was always afraid of spiders. So I did not see this film for a very, very long time. I'm almost thinking like this film could have been on my list whether I'd ever even saw it. It's like that's how scary this. Literally seeing that VHS tape in the Blockbuster growing up was scary. But I did finally see it when I was a teenager, and I think I was not actually anticipating the tone of this film. So this film is definitely a B movie, like through and through. It knows the premise is silly. It knows it's not trying to take itself too seriously either with how they handle the spiders, but it is still like, you talk about some moments in this film that sort of feed into my fear of spiders, scenes of people putting their shoes on and there's a spider in there and getting bitten. There's this terrifying scene in a shower where it's sort of like probably an actually allusion to the Psycho shower scene. But instead of Norman Bates showing up with a knife, this girl's in there like, taking a shower, and then a spider just slowly kind of comes down from the faucet and bites her. And these are all things that, I see a web and I get freaked out by that still. But yeah, the movie is a B movie. And, over time, especially after kind of seeing this, I'm like, you know what, maybe this is kind of a silly fear that I have. Of not all spiders are gonna kill you. Most spiders are actually harmless and they do a lot of good things. And honestly, like nowadays, even I'm still afraid of spiders. Like if I see one, I'll jump, but I don't immediately kill them. Like I always try to kind of rescue them and then put them outside, because they're also they're all part of nature. We're all nature. These are all just creatures. And again, like after seeing this movie and recently too for the podcast, like rewatching, I'm like, you know what, this movie is. I was afraid to look at it because from the outside, I just saw the poster. I'm like, no way, spider, arachnophobia. I'm terrified of this. But then when you actually kind of confront your fear, you realize that there is something kind of silly about it. And again, the tone of this movie, taking it not too seriously. It's like, I think there is something about facing your fears and realizing that they are kind of silly at the end of the day. There's the spiders in this film are some made up breed that are these spiders that could reproduce at amazing rates. Even the end of the film is really silly. Jeff Daniels is down in his basement and there's like this pulsating spider egg. When the spiders sort of make noises, they're like "Rawr!" And then as they're like going towards him, and I'm like, this is silly. But it was the point of the film. The film knows what it's doing. But I'm saying in a kind of a meta way, it's almost like my processing of this film at a later age, when I was finally willing to face my fears of the spider and watch this, I was like, you know what? Maybe I am being silly. And that, yes, I still have a fear of spiders, but it is something that, is sillier than I made it out to be as a kid. So I will say, actually, this movie holds up pretty well. I thought it's the characters are entertaining. You care about Jeff Daniels, this doctor who comes to town. John Goodman is an incredible performance as an exterminator who's just absolutely hilarious. It's so much funny stuff, and the effects are great too. Like so many of these spiders in this movie are real spiders. There's a scene at the end where it's just hundreds of spiders coming into their house, and it is actually still kind of scary.
That is kind of scary.
It is, but I think the fact that few animatronic spiders, the age pre-CGI, I think the practical effects and the real spiders they use make this movie still, kind of give me the creeps a bit. But yeah, I think this movie I had to put on the list because I couldn't even watch it for many, many years. And I was old enough and I saw it. I was like, you know what? Maybe my fear of spiders is a little silly, much like this movie. So that's Arachnophobia and my fear of spiders.
Well, first of all, good for you for like overcoming and facing your fears. That's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I remember watching this movie when it came out on VHS with, a bunch of kids, and I don't really have a fear of spiders per se. At that time when I watched as a kid, it was very much like, the typical sort of 80s movie with thrills and sort of jump scares and such, and I had a good time watching it. I have like a vague memory of watching like this one
Oh.
and like Killer Tomatoes.
Oh
I always
yeah.
sort of put them in the same kind of bucket.
Yeah, yeah.
But I hadn't seen this one since, I mean, now for preparing for the podcast. And I agree with everything you said. I will disagree on one thing, which is that I would actually not call this a B movie.
Oh, really?
I
Okay.
think I found this movie really entertaining,
Hmm.
really well made. Like, this is the time. Like, I kept thinking if this movie was made now, everything would be CGI.
Oh, yeah.
Everything would look terrible.
Hmm.
It wouldn't have this sense of place and kind of these sweeping shots when he's like driving on the highway,
Oh, yeah.
like just the color of this Californian town that you're in, sort of like sunny and kind of orangey. Like there's some like actual filmmaking thought that's been put into it.
Hmm.
Performances are really good. Like people have some agency. Of course there are plot holes all over the place, like
Yeah,
things
yeah,
don't
yeah.
make sense. Like why are all the spiders attacking the main house at the very end, even though the core is like right there? So
Yeah.
there's like that, of course. But overall, I think this movie is very well done. Like if this movie was made now, like I said, it would be unwatchable, I think, at least for me. So
Yeah.
I had a very good time watching it. I was very invested in the town
Yeah.
and Jeff Daniels, and like you said, that is the arc of the movie and his character too. He does overcome his fears,
Right.
you know.
That's true. Right. And then they move back to San Francisco. I love the
That's
stinger at
true.
the end too. And the earthquake happens. It's so
Yeah,
funny.
that is quite funny
um,
actually.
but yeah, when I mean B movie, I mean in not as a slight to the film.
Yeah.
I think I very much enjoy B movies. There's a certain kind of tone to them. But you're right. If this movie was made today, I think it could only be made as like a sci-fi channel original movie. Well, those don't even exist
Right.
anymore. But in that kind of like Sharknado type of lane, because that movie is very self-aware of what it's doing.
Yeah.
Sharknado, and I honestly think this movie is self-aware too. Like they know what they're making a silly movie about killer spiders, but with a lot of talent. I mean, I think this actually might have been Frank Marshall's first directed film. He was a longtime producer with his wife and then Steven Spielberg. I think this might have been the first movie directed, but I was actually blown away in the opening shots when they're down in South America. I'm like, this movie
It's
is
real.
gorgeous. Like I don't even know who the DP on this was, but like it looks amazing.
It looks great.
And exactly. They shot somewhere, they flew people down to wherever this place was.
Which is why not a B movie in my mind.
I don't mean in terms of budget, but in terms of tone. But I see what you're saying.
But tone too, I think.
Really?
Like, yeah, like I think now we live in a world where like, everybody who's making the movies like in on the joke, wink, wink, self-references. And this is why I can't stand. I mean, I don't think I can watch another superhero movie. Sorry, people will hate me for saying this out loud, but I'm just over it totally because of that. Like, oh, this connection, that we're aware, ha ha ha, just cannot do it. This movie is not aware in that sense. Like it knows that they're not making Schindler's List, but
right.
But they're not sort of, it's not a wink wink tale. They're serious about what is happening into this town, I think.
Yeah, maybe we should do an episode of B movies at one point. I think this could be an interesting thing a thread to continue to pull on. Yeah. But well, let's move on to your number 2 movie that shaped your fears.
I think this is, well, I wouldn't call it in the same tone actually. So my number 2 is a movie called The Firm from 1993, directed by Sidney Pollack, starring Tom Cruise, Gene Triplehorn, Gene Hackman. Quick log line from IMDb: a young lawyer joins a prestigious law firm only to discover that it has a sinister dark side. Also based on John Grisham's novel, which I should mention. So I put this movie on my list because for me, this movie is about my fear of making the deal with the devil and you don't know that you're doing this. And I think it's a little bit about, people sort of saying who they are, but they're not really who they are. And that's a fear that I've sort of had from a childhood time. I remember, meeting people at sort of parties and such with my parents, to the point I have this vivid memory that I was home alone with my aunts and my parents were away somewhere, I think on a trip or something. And I think I was missing them or something. And I love my aunt very much, but I sort of looked at her at night and said that, are you my real aunt? maybe you've been replaced by somebody else. So a very
Oh.
active imagination for a child. But I think on a serious note, this fear of mine of, are these people real, and am I making the deal with the devil, really manifests itself for real for me in a work context, because in a way you are signing up to be with people in a pretty intimate way,
Mm-hmm.
hand over your life, your livelihood, literally,
Mm-hmm.
to people that you don't really know much about. You just met them, you just spend like what, 6 to 8 hours with them interviewing or what have you, and then suddenly this is where you're going to spend like half of your days, and they are going to be in charge of your success, your progress, your money. Like, it's a lot, to kind of think about it. I mean, maybe I sound like a total freak right now, but it's, if you think about it, it's pretty crazy. Like, in real life, other relationships, like our romantic relationships or our friendships, like, they build over time. You get to know people over time. You're
Right.
not handing the keys to your home to them right off the bat. So I think this is why this sort of resonates. And then, the other fears that come in the work context are, well, if I have lots of optionality, am I making the right choice? What if I make the wrong choice? And then if I do make the wrong choice, I hope I don't end up disappointing people who I care, and including myself. So I think it's sort of a domino effect that starts from there on out. And so, yeah, this is why this movie is very real, for me, for all of those themes. As a movie, like, this is not a perfect movie. They're like giant plot holes and just things that just don't make any sense from a plot standpoint at all, but it's super entertaining, very, very rewatchable. In fact, the Rewatchable podcast did a podcast on this. I highly recommend that episode. But it's sort of, that time of movie making where you got ridiculous stars, and you could paint a movie like this, which is sort of ridiculous from a plot standpoint, on a super large scale, and you get the best talent there is for it behind and in front of the camera. And that's really why this movie is elevated. But there's a lot of genuine good stuff in it, for sure. Like, the sense of scale and place, we talk a lot about that in this play in our podcast. And I've never been to Memphis, and it sort of captures something different about, a place. Like, I think this movie is different if it's set in like a California
Yeah.
city or what have you. Like, you really feel, and I think the score, the brilliant, beautiful cinematography, kind of really elevates all of that. I think we are meeting all these actors and actresses at sort of the peak of their powers. Like, everybody is, it's like peak Cruise, peak Gene Triplehorn. Gene Hackman is always amazing. So, so everybody is amazing at what they're doing. And the sense of dread and fear pretty much sort of hangs throughout the entire movie. I think the
Mm-hmm.
middle part is a little bit saggy, but my favorite part actually is the first half, when they are trying to make that choice. They're being wined and dined and seduced
Mm.
by this company and that place. Like, I just love that whole piece. I mentioned Gene Hackman, who's amazing in this
Oh
movie.
yeah.
I'll give a quick shout out to Gene Triplehorn, who I always liked her, and watching this movie again for this podcast just reminded me, she actually is a pretty interesting character. I mean, there's some plot hole questions, like, why are you suddenly in the Cayman Islands doing
No.
whatever you're doing with Gene Hackman? Like, that makes no sense. But apart from that, I think this character has actually a fair bit of agency, which I appreciated. Like, she questions him. She's the one who's suspicious right from the get-go. She's a little bit of an audience surrogate. Like, in my mind, I was like, oh, this was just a wife who just moved along because of the husband's job, which she does. But
Mm-hmm.
in my head, I sort of had her as a lesser character. And I think, even though on the page there's just a lot of problems with this whole arc of hers, I think she as an actress brings a lot to the movie. Like, you see that this is an intelligent woman who, stands for herself a little bit. So I appreciated that. But yeah, it's a great watch. It's one of my favorite John Grisham movie adaptations, just because of everybody involved. Really, very entertaining. So yeah, that's my number two, The Firm.
Yeah, this is another movie I thought I'd seen. I thought I like had vague memories of seeing it, but after
Mhm.
watching it, I don't think I had seen this before. In terms
Huh.
of the fears part, and then I'll get into the film. Yeah, I
Yeah.
do think this definitely is to me viewed similarly, like what is the cost of success, and that in this modern world where you want success through a job, if success is status in a career, and then obviously it comes along with it wealth, you have, like, what is the cost of that? What are you willing to sign away? And in this movie, to join the quote unquote firm, you do need to sign away a lot of your freedom, and then also your morality. Which, in modern, I mean, the whole idea of a workplace is you do sign away your freedom. You go to work and you're in a dictatorship. Your boss tells you what to do. You have no choice but to follow him or her, or else you're fired. You're executed. You're banished. So even when you're in a job, you are living in a dictatorship for 8 hours a day. You're hopefully not signing away your morality, but I think those.
I don't view it that way, but sure, yes.
Actually, that's anyway. But some people are given the choice to potentially sign away their morality, and Tom Cruise in this film is seduced a lot by that. And then at the end of the day, he realizes, no, this is gone. I cannot sacrifice this part of who I am, and then I must, fight back against the firm, which I definitely can relate to all those things, like you can, just in a modern workplace environment, and people focus on their careers. Like, these are decisions, I think, and choices that you're that are put in front of you, not to this extreme.
Not to
this extreme.
And in a interesting way, like, I think we make the choices that are heavily governed by where we stand and the demons we carry, right? Like, it's very on the nose in the movie that, oh, this is like a guy who didn't have a lot of money,
exactly,
and, brother, and there's a lot of issues, not done very subtly, but I'm guessing that's just how the book is. But I think there is something real there. Like, I can look back in my life and think about all the job choices I've made, decisions I've made. There's been something pretty deep that's powered those decisions. There's an intellectual component to that, but then there's also this sort of, subjective thing that's sort of deep under that you can't really put your finger on. And hopefully as you get older, you can recognize that more and more. So I think I love that too about the movie.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Exactly. He's trying to chase the ghosts of his father and his unsuccessful, or not, I don't say unsuccessful, his poor upbringing. And that's what he's trying to replace by going to the firm and all the success, quote unquote success, that comes along with that, but is it a cost? So I do think those
family, right? That's what sells him. They say that we are a family. He hasn't had one.
That's true.
Brother is in jail, and we don't have no clue about his mother, what have you. So it's money, but also that sense of belongingness.
Right. Which is another thing that, working in a job, they try to sell you that line too. Like, oh, you're a family, even though families can't fire people. So I always push back against that workplaces are not families. They're the exact opposite of that. But actually in this movie, in a sense, it is a family because you can't leave. Which is true from your actual family. But in terms of the film itself, I mean, it's funny you were saying there wasn't much of a connection to the arachnophobia, but I actually think this movie is very much like it is. I mean, this is the early 90s, but a total 90s cheese fest of a film.
Yeah,
like it's absolutely hilarious.
Really.
It's so amazing. There were just like very overly melodramatic lines of dialogue that most of the cast, even though it's an incredibly stacked cast, couldn't really pull off, except for Hackman. I think he could do anything. He's such a talented actor. Cruise, I feel like sometimes dude, you need another take on this. I know it's the writing's fault, but you can try to elevate it a little bit. And man, just speaking of cast, there are two scenes that just I had to almost pause the screen and be like, what's going on? The first scene is you have Jigsaw, who's the murderer from Saw, in a scene with Holly Hunter, Gary Busey, and Hank from Breaking Bad. I'm like, what is who is what? Why are all these people in the same scene? And then another scene, you have again Jigsaw from Saw, Tom Cruise, and the diabetes guy in one scene. This is the star power of this scene. I'm like, Jigsaw's talking to diabetes, and here's Tom Cruise. I love movies like this where even the side characters are, either they're going to be big stars Jigsaw and then Hank, but the cast is so deep. But again, amazing. I think that's something they used to do a lot in the 90s. They stack all the way down to the most minor character. You have these great character actors that are playing all these roles. So that was so much I was like, oh my gosh, it's so 90s.
Good and does elevate the movie,
totally. You get Walter Brimley in anything.
Brimley, exactly.
Immediate, you get that insulin shot of Walter Brimley and it's boom, you got it. But yeah, I mean, in the film definitely was like kind of flabby, I would say. Like it probably deserved 30-40 minutes kind of cut out of it. There are definitely
Yeah,
parts that it almost felt like they were looking at a book, which, I've never read a Grisham novel, but it felt like they were adapting a book without trying to make it cinematic. It definitely felt like I was watching a book be kind of read to me, and the way that the plot kind of like moved along. And I was like, oh, I could
I've
see this
heard that. Like it's very
working.
much it follows that
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
pattern. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which whatever. I mean, most adaptations I feel fall into that trap a lot. But yeah, the other thing that I was most distracted to me that was the score. I just really, really didn't like, and it was shocked to
I
find out
liked
it
it.
was Oscar nominated. I couldn't.
Yeah, I love
Every
the score.
5 minutes, that little score had to come in and just be beating me over the head with how melodramatic stuff was. But similar to, there's another film we watched recently that First Wives Club, I thought was one of the worst scores I'd ever heard, and that also was Oscar nominated. So something was going on in the '90s where like I was just not on the same page as the Academy when it came to scores. It's just really
I
interesting.
love
But
both of these
I
scores.
know.
In
Well, I
fact,
mean, so
yeah,
does the Academy. They were both Oscar
yeah.
nominated. So I'm clearly in the minority. But like I was watching it and being like bothered as I was like, who scored this? And
Oh
I looked it up on my
no.
phone. I was like, wait, what? Like, okay. And then I was like, Oscar nominated. What the? But anyway, yeah, it's a fun cheeseball '90s film for sure. That again, just watching it just for the scene where you get Saw and Holly Hunter and Gary Busey and Hank in one scene, like I can't slag the movie off too much for that. But it was a fun watch, I'll say. I think it fits more closely to like the tone of Arachnophobia than
You're
for sure
probably
like
right. I
Facing the
was
Crowd.
hesitating on that, but I think you're
Yeah, it's
probably right.
fun. I
Yeah,
do think we need to
it's
do this
really
B
fun.
movie episode though. I think this kind of fit into
Again,
that in a way
not
too.
a B movie, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Um,
All right. So what's your next, Alex?
so my number two film that shaped my fears is 1976's Network. This is a film starring Sidney Lumet, not starring Sidney Lumet, directed by Sidney Lumet, starring Faye Dunaway, William Holden, Peter Finch, Robert Duvall, and Ned Beatty. The IMDb plot summary: a television network cynically exploits a deranged former anchor's ravings and revelations about the news media for its own profit, but finds that his message may be difficult to control. So this is a film that very much so is in dialogue, I think, with Face in the Crowd for
Yep.
sure. I mean, they very much so were influenced by a lot of the same messages that they were bringing up. I mean, I've saw this film first time maybe 20 or so years ago, and it has always stuck with me and actually become more scary, I'll use that word, over time. And the reason that this film speaks to me, especially in the context of fears, is this movie really is about, in a similar way to we were discussing with Face in the Crowd, is a fear of systems, whether we're all in these giant systems that are very powerful, control us in ways we do and don't even understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that because of this, it's very difficult to fight back against that. Like there's not an individual villain. There's no person in this movie who's the bad guy. There is just this amorphous system that you have to fight against. And it especially what happens to Howard Beale, you see how you cannot really, or at least is what this movie is saying, is you can't fight back against the system. The system always wins in the end. So then what is so scary to me about that premise is like, okay, well then, is there any hope at all? Like, can we actually, like we were talking about earlier with Facing the Crowd, like, beat back these systems that are, slowly kind of killing society? Well, what can we do? I mean, yes, these are human created things, but can we actually dismantle them? And, what this film does so well too, is it shows, this newscaster who kind of goes crazy essentially and rants about like, oh, this is all fake and everything's a lie and, all this stuff. And obviously that resonates very well with the audience because people kind of feel that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, wow, someone's actually saying it who's on the TV. This is back in the mid 70s when TV was super, super powerful. It'd be like someone now today saying this on Twitch, I guess. But and the system actually allows him to do that. At first they're seduced by the ratings too, like similar to Facing the Crowd. It's all about money, right? And this movie is a lot about how the corporations have taken over the news. There's a lot of some B plots around that as well, where who's in control, the editorial or the corporation. But the corporation's okay with him going on every day and essentially espousing these things against the system in general. So it's in a way is saying that great, freedom of speech, cool, like you can say whatever you want, but what's really that's not that can't necessarily be the only tool you use to fight back against the system, because he has freedom to say all these things on the network that is paying him money to basically say, oh, the system's a lie, even though the network who's part of the system, they kind of let him do it up until the point where he actually will endanger the money of the network. And he starts talking
Exactly.
about, oh, you can't do this merger with the Saudis, because screw the Saudis. And at that point, they're like, uh-oh, like this guy's actually gone too far. It doesn't matter, criticize the system all you want, but if you're putting our bottom line in jeopardy, that's when we
All
have to
about
draw the
that.
line. It's all about that. And to me, actually, one of the yeah, I'll say the word scariest scenes in any film ever is the Ned Beatty speech. One of the most amazing scenes in any film, too, where he basically sits Howard Beale down and speaks him the real truth about how the world
Hmm.
actually works.
Hmm.
That there are, oh, you talk about, the Saudis and the Arabs and the Americans. Like there's no Saudis, there's no Arabs, there's no Americans, there's no Western, there's no Eastern. There's just one big system of corporations. And that's
Yeah.
how the world works. There is no democracy. He says there's no democracy, there's no America. And, honestly, I believe that is also how the world works. That we're in this place now where there are all these things are sort of side distractions to the real problem. And even when you know what that is, I mean, he tells Howard Beale all these, he basically reveals the real truth to Howard Beale, and Howard Beale can't do anything to fight against that, and
No.
then loses in the end. And it really
And
just
he
goes,
can't either.
who's Ned Beatty?
Yeah.
Right. No, totally. Yeah. He's not like, oh, this is my evil plan. He's like, look, dude, like we're all in this thing. I just happen to be, higher up the chain. But look, this is all like the system is really in control here. And that's a scary thing to feel like, well, then
Hmm.
who is man in the ship? I'd rather have a crazy person who's like a total insane person leading the ship, because at least, okay, we get rid of the captain, we're fine. But the fact that there is no one at the helm, then it's like, whoa, then what's really going on here? That is actually even more scary to me. And that's what this movie, takes it to that even next level, past what Kazan was doing with Facing the Crowd. Again, I think they're both brilliant films and equally brilliant. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other, but it's just looking at things in a larger way. I mean, now it's been 20 years has passed, and there's been more like corporatization of every sector of the economy since when Kazan was working in the 50s. And that to me is scary. And the fact that you can't, even if there's been a lot of talk, and some people believe, oh, you just need to get on TV and speak the truth, and that's all you need to do, and I just got to speak the truth. Okay,
Or on
like,
Twitter.
yeah, or on oh, just let me say the truth, and once the truth gets out, all of a sudden the truth will set you free, and the truth will change people's minds. I don't really believe that's true. Like, okay, that's something. I'm not saying don't speak the truth, but if you speak the truth, all of a sudden that doesn't change anything. You need to then enact that change. And that's what this movie
Right.
shows too. Like, he speaks the truth, but nothing changes. If anything, things get worse for him. But I think that is what to me is always that one scene with Ned Beatty. I mean, you check, if you've never seen the movie, you just put that on YouTube. It's like 3-4 minutes, one of the most amazing monologues, and it still gives me chills and it instills a fear in me of like, oh my God, like this is where
We
we
are
are
doomed.
still. We're doomed, right? And if this movie was made in the 70s, and I think it's only even more true now. I mean, he could give the same speech if they remade this movie in 2022. Ned Beatty's speech could be delivered today, and nothing would need to change at all about it, and it's still just as relevant. So, to me, it's these systems of control, much like when Facing the Crowd, that no one's manning those, and we can't really do anything about it. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I mean, it is an episode about fear, so you want to talk about the fears. But and look, but also I just say too, like the movie is very funny. It's a satire. The stuff with the Marxist extremists who are fighting over there's a plot line of these Marxist group who get a TV deal because now all of a sudden everything Howard Beale is saying is popular in ratings. They're trying to find other extremist points of view to put on the TV. And there's this great scene where they're arguing about, oh, I want this cut of the profits, and they're getting their talent manager in there. And it's obviously it's a big satire of how these revolutionary groups can be co-opted into the system as well. But yeah, it's just a brilliant film that, again, because it's so much like Facing the Crowd, you watch and you're like, wow, this is still happening today. It's even scarier in that respect.
Yeah, this is obviously one of the masterpieces of film. It's in the pantheon. So yeah, I agree with everything you said, obviously. But yeah, it's interesting like how they are in dialogue with each other. And I was thinking a lot about that, obviously on the themes you touched on, but also the Lonesome Road character can be sort of maligned and panned for in a different way, that, oh, you're connecting with the dumb masses, or
Hmm.
you're speaking to them, and that's somehow, lesser in a
Hmm.
way
Hmm.
than what Harvard Beale is doing. But it's the way that these two movies, if you look at them in that dialogue sense, it kind of normalizes that as well, in a
Hmm.
way, that's why these fears are so much about the system, and to me at least transcend political
Oh,
affiliations and
sure. Yeah.
parties,
Right.
because it doesn't matter where you come from. It's the same setup, really, that here
Hmm.
is somebody who's connecting with people on something that he or she believes in, or actually we don't know if what they believe in it, but
No,
that doesn't even
it
matter.
doesn't
It's
matter.
really about, oh, have you tapped into something that connects you with, the broader masses. And in the network case, the masses are portrayed to be sort of more educated city living people,
Hmm.
versus in Facing the Crowd, it's sort of more of the rural
Right.
middle America sort of crowd. But at the end of the day, it's just people.
Exactly.
And I thought that was very interesting, that it
Yeah.
kind of humanizes that in a way.
Right. I mean, the two movies, if you see it like that, it's like, well, you can't just say, oh, well, those are the dumb hicks who fell for Lonesome
Right.
Roads. Oh, the people in New York never would. Well, actually, like Network is saying, no, it's like,
It's
yeah, it could be, it's honestly the same. And the system, I mean, because everything is political. So the system is political, but it's
yeah,
not, it doesn't, I mean, to paraphrase Ned Beatty in this film, there are no Republicans, there are no Democrats, there's no
yeah,
conservatives, no liberals. There's just a system that is driving towards essentially just profit, and that
yeah.
is the god of this system. And it's like, how can we exploit as much or get as much profit as possible, and then nothing else matters. And that is incredibly political, but not in this traditional like political party lens, I guess I should say.
No, no,
um and
absolutely. Yeah,
and that's what makes it scarier in a way, because then
yeah.
it feels that, okay, well, all this back and forth that goes on, I mean, just talk about America first. Well, you can't say it in the world, but in America, at least, like, where we view, as every country does, through the lenses of the political parties that exist. But really, that's almost beside the point, is what both of these
Yeah,
movies are basically saying. It's like, who really cares one way or the other, Democrat, Republican? The system is the thing that's controlling everything.
yeah.
And it always wins, or at least that's what both of these films kind of say, though in a way, like Facing the Crowd is a little more optimistic, I think,
A
because you
little bit.
see that the people that try to ride that system end up empty at the end, because Lonesome Roads is still lonesome at the end. He
That's
doesn't
true.
really get what he wants, even though he thought he wanted attention. But that can only get you so far. Whereas in this film, like, Howard Beale, I just think feels like there's nothing else to do but, quote unquote, speak the truth, because everything else has been taken from him. And he's at wit's end, so he feels he has nothing to lose. But the film, actually, he does lose in the end. The only
Yeah.
thing he has left. But yeah, it's, again, not to be pessimistic, but this is an episode about fears. I mean, I think both these movies do. I watch them like, oh crap, like, what can we do?
What can we do? On the Lonesome Road thing, I actually think either he goes crazy, or slash and in a few years he starts all over again.
Well, that's the scary moment in that film. I
Exactly.
forgot we didn't talk about that scene where Walter Matthau's like, "We've seen you. What you'll just come back,
Yeah,
and
you'll
maybe you
come
won't
back.
be as big, but you'll come back." And that is 100% true. Like,
Exactly.
the amount of reformed, sort of quote unquote canceled people, they all come back as in
They
a
all come
different
back.
form. No one's ever really canceled. And it's just, he'll be, yeah, if he decides to continue to go on that road. um
Or it's less about him, like we've been saying, it's once again the system. If the
oh, right,
system
right.
sees something in whatever his brand of crazy is at that time, and if the
Hmm.
system feels that, oh yeah, this we could leverage from this, then he'll be back.
Right.
But here's the thing, talking through this, is that yes, the system is, but let's not forget the system is being maintained and propelled by people,
True.
and
That
that
is
is
true.
why, like, the system is not just some like alien amorphic thing. It is very much a sum total of people's fears and motivations and
Hmm.
intentions, all summed up. So, which is why this is scarier, because it's sort of this endless cycle. Unless we as a human race totally change in terms of what our intentions and motivations and picture of success
Mm-hmm.
means, the system doesn't change either. The system
Right.
has just been mirroring what we
Right.
valued, you
No,
know?
totally,
So,
totally. Yeah, it brings, I view it as it highlights the darker parts of
yeah.
humanity and focuses on that, and then that is what it feeds off of, and we need
Mhm.
to, as a society, find the good parts of who we are as humans. And if we just shift to that and have a society and a life based around love and not profit, that's where we can break free of this. But that's a hard thing to do, because
That's
the
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 hard thing
dark
to
the
do.
dark side, as they say or as they show a lot in Star Wars, dark side is always stronger than the light. Like, the dark is stronger, but you need just to get but they're always a minority. In Star Wars is only two Sith. There can only be two. So there's not many of them, but they're strong. But once you get a
Mhm.
lot of the Jedi, anyway, not to make this
Mhm.
into a Star Wars episode, but no, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
But on a lighter
It-
note, on a
yeah.
more positive note, I think the reason why this whatever we are in continues is because we do all have light in us as well.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there may not be broad sweeps of change happening that we can really grasp, the fact that we can get up every morning and kind of do what we have to do and still find meaning is because we have that center of light in us.
Mm-hmm.
So otherwise, we would have all been doomed,
That's true.
right after Facing the Crowd was made in the
That's
50s,
true.
whenever that was made, right? So yeah, I think that's sort of the interesting kind of contradiction to all of this, I guess.
No, totally. I mean, I am optimistic about the future long term. I think when I look at these movies, it's not like, oh, we're doomed in the future. It's like, okay, well, we're still here. We're still in the same place we
Still
were in the
here.
50s and the 70s. These are still the same problems. But again, like I mentioned during the Facing the Crowd piece, these systems are new. Like, it's not like we've lived under
Yeah.
this yoke for thousands of years. It's only really been a couple hundred. And not even the whole world was under the yoke until the 20th century of that really the end of the 20th century. So it's really only been 20 years that we've been all woven together into this global system. So it's new, and it's quickly showing itself to not work. And I think at the end of the day, love always wins. It just sometimes takes a while.
It takes a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, my number one, very
Speaking
much
of
about
love, yeah,
speaking of love, as well as the light inside us slash not.
yeah.
My number one is Revolutionary Road from 2008, directed by Sam Mendes, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet, a whole bunch of other good people. Quick logline from IMDb. A young couple living in Connecticut suburbs during the mid 1950s struggles to come to terms with their personal problems while trying to raise their two children. Not the best plot line, but sure.
No.
Okay, so I put this movie on my list, and this is my number one, is because to me, this is really about, well, I'll say this. When I watched it years ago, right when it came out, it used to be about the fear of not making the choice that was offered to you
Mm-hmm.
and what would happen if you didn't do that and your
Mm-hmm.
whole life will be ruined. And it's funny that as I've grown older, now it's become more about chasing the choice,
Mm.
chasing that, whatever that utopian dream happiness thing is that is so elusive, and in the bargain sort of ruining everything you actually do have. And I think these two kind of interpretations of that fear will always live with me. One might be higher, one might be lower.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's sort of in a way, we've been talking a lot about sort of existential fears of humanity. I think this to me is a core human thing.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to everything else that we've talked about. But personally, yeah, I watched this movie when I just moved to LA. There's definitely a dark time in my life where I was sort of figuring things out. I didn't know many people, so there was obviously a lot of loneliness as part
Mm.
of my life as well. I felt a little bit directionless, and I somehow just stumbled upon this movie and it kind of wrecked me.
Mm.
This is kind of sad, but yeah, the score of this movie, which I don't like Thomas Newman, but this is one of the few scores that I do like of his. It's sort of stuck with me, and it's emblematic of that time in my life. I don't listen to that score. I since hadn't. because it sort of takes me back to that place of uncertainty and fear and just sort of feeling a little bit lost, really. But yeah, that's sort of how powerful this movie was. But yeah, at the core of it, though, it is about those things like I mentioned up top. But it's at the core of it, it's about really not communicating with yourself and or your partner or the people who are important in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't do that, how these things sort of build up inside of you and then escalate, and then it's too late to really turn around. That's what this is about. And I do have a fear of that, because we're, on one hand, human beings are very simple and predictable, but on the other hand, we are also very complicated because of really of our own mind.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't deal with the things that we value or don't value, you don't know where they might lead you to, and that's sort of the fear I've always had. But as a movie, this movie is not perfect. I think it's flawed. It drags a bit and such. That said, though, on a performance level, I think this movie is sort of brilliant. Like what Kate and Leo are doing is sort of otherworldly in my mind, especially her and even him. Like this sort of feeling of total helplessness, really, on his part. He's not your typical stereotypical one-dimensional husband character. There's a lot more to him, and you really feel that he's trapped in his own
Mm-hmm.
kind of prison of
Mm-hmm.
work and life, and so is she. And yeah, you sort of see this relationship unravel, a relationship that was formed on some sort of dream-like promise. But the fact is that the dreams don't just happen out of nowhere. You have to build towards those dreams, and these people actually don't do that. They've
Mm-hmm.
never really communicated, they've never really dealt with each other in a real way, and then of course, shit explodes terribly. And yeah, you can call this movie and say, oh, this is about the suburbs in the 50s where things were restricted and blah blah blah. No, this can happen today.
Mm-hmm.
This is not about when we live. This is very internal. Yes, there are external things that power some of this or fuel some of this, perhaps, but you know human prisons and traps have always been there. They will always be there
Mm-hmm.
from a societal standpoint. It's sort of how you deal with those things, and can you really? I mean, a lot of that is also not in our own hands often. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy that, oh,
Right.
why
Right.
didn't you deal with your stuff? No, you can't sometimes
Mm-hmm.
because of all sorts of reasons. But yeah, back to the movie. Like the period detail is amazing. Score I already talked about. Sam Mendes. It's Roger Deakins, of
Oh
course.
yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
just unbelievable. You're completely transported to this place, but really you're transported to this home, which sort of becomes the center of dread and anger and grief and paranoia. And you're almost sort of in a prison-like environment with these two people, even though it's also beautiful and amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot to mention Kathy Bates and Michael Shannon, who are
Oh, so great.
so great, and even Catherine Hahn and David Harbour. Like you're seeing so many different perspectives. It does have a play-like quality to it, which I like actually in this
Mm-hmm.
movie. So anyway, that is my number one, Revolutionary Road.
Yeah, this is a great film, and it's actually interesting that you mentioned your perspective changed over time. So I saw this film when it
Mhm.
first came out in theaters, and then I don't know if I ever saw it again until this podcast. I enjoyed it a
Mhm.
lot, but it's like, what? Not an easy movie to say, oh, let's throw on
No.
Revolutionary Road. And it definitely at the time, I remember a lot of the things you were talking about just then, and like, oh, talking about the suburbia in the 50s, and trapped in that system back then, and it was blah blah blah, the dream, is that really the dream? And that's how I saw the film. And now definitely, yeah, that's there, but it's you're totally right, like this could happen. The time and the place is sort of irrelevant. It just adds another layer, but it's not the only
Right.
thing that the movie's about. It really is, like you said, like communication. I mean, I think this the opening of this film is brilliant. So you get
Oh
like
gosh.
that starts with their meet cute moment, and you already are coming into this film with baggage of, this is Jack and Rose. The
Yeah.
world has seen Titanic. the
Yeah.
world feels that this is the, the true love that is meant to be, because everyone's
Yeah.
seen that film and this is the first time they've acted in a movie together since then. So you're immediately like, oh my God, this is like true love. And you see these people and they're so in love. And then it immediately cuts to the, present day in the film. And they start from a scene where they're right next to each other, like kind of bonding on a cellular level. And then it cuts to where now they're separated by distance. He's in an audience. She's on a stage conveying fake emotions. A curtain closes between them. Like they're immediately physically distanced. And now it's like you can see that she's there doing fake emotions as part of the play. And he's there taking this stuff in. So it's like, well, they're clearly not immediately communicating. And then, you see that they're fighting and all this stuff happens. And like we touched on this with The Firm, Tom Cruise's character is trying to escape his past, like you said, with his poor upbringing. And in this film too, there's like little allusions to Leonardo DiCaprio's father, having worked in this with this company or in this factory or something, a sales
30
manager.
years, whatever.
Right. Yeah, he worked really, really hard, but didn't get anything, and no one even remembers who he is. And that ghost of his dad is what is driving Leo to be like, you know what? I want to take this job. Actually, it's important to me because I feel like now I have to redeem my father in some way, or at least go through that emotional baggage. But he never talks about that to his wife. So she doesn't understand, well, why are you trying to go for this job? I think as an audience, I know why. Like, oh, I know what's going on. It's because your dad is a big part of this. Why don't you tell her this? But he's not telling her that. And that is what, leads to them not being able to mend their relationship because there's no communication. And then, the button on the end of the film of, Kathy Bates talking about this couple to her husband who's got a hearing aid. And then he just turns it off. And he's like, you know what? I don't want to talk to my wife anymore either. Like, and he can physically shut her up. And that again, it shows, okay, well, no communication. Like this is still the cycle that's going to continue again. And that is now how I viewed this film. It's all about, look, you got to be open and honest and communicate with people about how you're feeling and what's really going on, or else you're not going to be able to make the right choices and get what you want in your life if you're trying to do it with somebody else. Which is what this movie is all about, relationships and love and marriage and all these sort of things. So I definitely viewed it as a different interpretation myself of that fear of not being fully honest with somebody, then literally killing you or killing somebody else. But also like Leo's not happy at the end. Like nobody ends.
He's a ghost in that
total
park.
Ghost. Oh my God. Yeah. It's so sad. And if he had only had the, I don't know if it's courage or just the emotional awareness to put into better context with Kate Winslet's character on like why he is now saying, you know what, maybe we shouldn't run off to France. I think, that is at least how I was looking at this film, which is still an incredibly sad film, but incredible performances all around. I do feel this is when Leo started growing up as an actor. I've always loved him, but he definitely is not, he took him a while to kind of actually become a very good actor, I feel. And this movie was a huge step forward for him. And Kate Winslet has just always been incredible and just, incredible performance by her. And for both of them making the decision to, this is the movie we want to do after Titanic is a very interesting choice.
She seeked him out. Like she really lobbied him for like multiple years because she was like, it has to be us doing this together. Because of the Jack Rose thing that you talked about, but also their own friendship. And I think I can only imagine as actors to be in that sort of a dark space, let alone your husband then directing you. It's his husband.
True.
So, it's a very interesting sort of dynamic. And sadly, their marriage doesn't make it through, I don't know how long after the movie was made that they separated. So it's just sort of, it just shows like there's so much of like humanity and human connection in the making of this movie. And it comes across. It shows.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a movie that is still great that I recommend. And it just was interesting. Both of us had different, I don't know, say interpretations, but they're different. New layers are sort of peeled back.
New layers were added,
after coming back to the film after so long. And to me, that's what makes a good film. That it evolves as you evolve as a person. You see more things in it. It's a hard watch because
it's a hard watch.
It's not an uplifting film, but it's still a great movie.
Yeah, it's a hard watch, but I think at least the first, except for the last act, the rest of it, I can still, this is kind of not a right word, but I can still very enjoyably watch because I just love just the setup setting. 50s is my favorite time period, especially when
Ah,
being kind of looked at by more contemporary people, which is
oh
why I can
yeah.
watch Todd Haynes movies like over and over again, even though they're all sad and depressing in some form or
Hmm.
the other. But I don't know, there's something very appealing to me about that period. I don't know what
Mm,
it is. I need to do some more self-digging on that. And then it's just these two people, I
yeah,
can watch them sit in the kitchen and just read a phone book and or
yeah,
squeeze oranges. I don't care. I'll
yeah.
sit with them. They're just so brilliant. Yeah,
Totally. Definitely. Well, we should do an episode on the 50s. That would be really interesting. I think
that
it's
would
a
be a good.
a,
Actually,
f-
it's a
a, f-
good one.
a
Yeah,
fascinating decade which you can interpret in a lot of different ways, and a
totally,
lot of filmmakers have. So,
totally. All right. What is your number one?
so my number one movie that shaped my fears is Hollow Man from 2000. This is directed by Paul Verhoeven, which I think this is the first time we've done a Verhoeven film on this
Yep.
podcast. So I'm happy to finally bring him into the conversation. Starring Kevin Bacon, Elizabeth Shue, Josh Brolin, and Kim Dickens, based on the H.G. Wells book, The Invisible Man. And the plot summary is a brilliant scientist's discovery renders him invisible, but transforms him into an omnipotent, dangerous megalomaniac. To end my list here, we've talked about systems a lot and other things. I even mentioned spiders is something I'm afraid of. But why I put this film as number one, um, to me, this film was a perfect encapsulation of being afraid of yourself and who you actually are and what you really could do as a person. And it's a question that is very hard to really honestly ever answer until you're put into situations where you really can see the true nature of who you actually are. And the thing that this movie, the way that this movie exemplifies it is through the Kevin Bacon character, who's the titular character, the Hollow Man, or the Invisible Man. And this again, I mentioned this was an adaptation of H.G. Wells' story, which is one of my favorite H.G. Wells stories. I love a lot of the film adaptations. The original James Whale film, Invisible Man's great. The most recent Blumhouse one was actually very great too. And there's been tons of other, John Carpenter made an Invisible Man film. But all these films were really about, first of all, they were based on the premise that the serum that you take drives you crazy. That it's the
Hmm.
serum. There's something in the serum that drives each of the Invisible Men a little bit mad. Or it's about like the most recent one is about the Invisible Man's victims.
Hmm.
But this film really asked the question of it's not the serum. This guy was always a bad guy.
Hmm.
But what the serum did is it removed all consequence of any of his actions. So now he can literally do anything he wants and never pay any external price. The only price he pays is the knowledge of something that he did and the guilt of doing that thing. And the question that it asks is like, if you were in that situation where you literally could do anything, no one's stopping you, and if you did that action, you're never going to get punished for it in any way. Like, what would you actually do? And we have these, I guess, systems essentially of laws in place or societies, moral codes, and things. People looking down on other people for doing certain things. All these things exist to hold society together. And there's obviously, I very much believe in the rule of law and all these things. But if you strip all that away, who are you at the end of the day?
Hmm.
And this film starts with Kevin Bacon as a scientist. He's a visible man. And there's a scene where he's in his apartment and then he kind of looks across the way and he's peeping Tom into a neighbor who's this hot woman across the street. And she's sort of like, he gets mad that she closes the blinds right as she's undressing herself. He's like, oh, that's so annoying. So you kind of feel, okay, this guy's kind of a creep, but like, okay, well, whatever. Peeping Tom, harmless crime in a way. And then when he becomes invisible, he's back in his apartment. He looks across the way and sees her there. And then she kind of, again, is coming out of the shower or what have you. And he thinks there's a wait a second, like I can go over there right now and see her. Like nothing stopped me from doing that. Before it was like
Hmm.
I can't physically do it. So he does go over there.
Hmm.
And then it quickly escalates to he rapes her. So in effect, like this isn't the serum that's making him into a rapist. In the opening films of the film, he, if he could have raped her, it's sort of saying, yeah, he would have done it. But
Hmm.
he didn't because he felt there was consequences. And now that he's free of that, it escalates to the point where he rapes his neighbor, which is terrible. Same thing with violence in the film too. Like he clearly is not a very nice guy, like kind of yells at his coworkers a lot. But then he becomes invisible, and you see early on in this scene, he like is able to kill a fly. And it's like, oh, interesting. Like I can kill a fly now because like fly can't see me coming. And then later he starts like harming physically his
Mm-hmm.
coworkers. And then there's even a line in the film where he says like, I thought killing you would be hard, but actually like I can do this really easily. I like this. And then he kills one of his coworkers, which again is like, oh, now that there's no consequence at all, the true nature of who this person is exposed to the world. And even though he kind of seemed like sort of a bad guy, he's actually like an evil guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is what the great way that Verhoeven's able to adapt the H.G. Wells film in a way that none of the other films ask this question, I feel, in such a blunt way. It's like, oh, the serum made the guy crazy. Or, oh, this guy was, or the victims don't like being chased by invisible men. But this movie is really for the first time asking that question. And especially juxtaposing up against the character of Greg Grunberg, who's one of the, he's like a lab assistant he's seen there sort of like, oh, asking him, oh, hey, you're invisible now. It's like, did you sneak in any girls' locker rooms and stuff? Like what might come across as, oh, harmless questions. He's there like looking at pornography and stuff and kind of gets, excited when Kevin Bacon's like, yeah, I was doing a little bit of snooping, right? And he's like, oh, ha, ha, ha. Again, it's like, wait, so with this guy now, is this actually harmless fun that he's saying? Or if he was invisible, would Greg Grunberg now go rape someone?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? And that's, I watched this film and I was struck with the question of like, I would like to think I would know what I would do. And I have my own moral code. And I don't really, it's not because I'm afraid of getting arrested or I don't want to be hurting other people for the sake of, I just don't want to do that. And I can tell myself that as much as I want. And I'd love to think that if I got invisible in the same situation, I would not be abusing it in the way that Kevin Bacon is. But I mean, I have to be honest with myself. I will not. Know. I don't know, and I think that is what this film is so brilliant because it really asks that question, and it doesn't really. It answers it for Kevin Bacon's character, but it makes the audience ask themselves that, and it's a scary situation because you never can answer because unfortunately or fortunately, we don't have invisible serums. Actually, in a way, you can sort of say like some people when you become rich enough, you feel like you were without consequence. And that's why we see a lot of problems with, rich people doing very horrible things because they feel now, I think, like Kevin Bacon's character in Hollow Man, where they can do whatever because money makes them free of consequence, essentially. Which is something interesting. Then you see what their real true colors are, right? And there's that line too, that famous line about, power corrupts, right? Does it corrupt or does power just reveal who you really are? And I think that's what makes this film so brilliant. And what is something that I always ask myself, like, am I a good person? Like, how do I really know that? I'm the only one that can answer that question too, but I don't have an answer and I kind of never will. And that's why I had to put this film at the top of the list. I think it's a brilliant adaptation of Invisible Man because it's the first one that goes in this very interesting psychological direction, which, I expect nothing less of Paul Verhoeven, who's one of my favorite directors, and I'm glad we're finally able to talk about him in this podcast, even though he disparaged the film and he sort of disowned it and said actually he'd never work in Hollywood again because of his experiences on this film. But I think he's too hard on his own work. It is scary. It's a scary question that I will never know the answer to. So I had to put this as number one on my list.
Yeah, it's a great interpretation of this film. And I mean, you're talking about rich people. I went on my soapbox last time about sort of, horror stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I feel a little bit about Halloween. The moment people are in masks and drunk around,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is exactly the feeling I get that suddenly you are anonymous now and consequences are sort of not really on the table to a degree. And what are you going to do?
Right.
And that is not fun for me at all. So yeah, no. And it's also a very brilliantly made movie. Like the effects hold up.
Oh, effects incredible.
Promises are great. Yeah. It's a thriller. I remember watching it when it came out, or whenever I watched it. What year is this again?
It came out in 2000.
Okay, yeah. So I think I watched it when it came out, and I remember being just thrilled, edge of your seat sort of experience, and it sort of felt very much similar. But like you said, I don't think I picked up on that deeper interpretation when I watched it the first time, or maybe just didn't think about it. But this time around, I definitely thought about that. I will say, though, it is interesting, like how he feeds off on it. And I think that's also a thing, right? Like yeah, we may be evil or bad from the beginning, but
Mm-hmm.
it is about that no consequences feeling that sort of feeds you more and more,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then
Mm-hmm.
and that's true in a positive direction too in our lives, right? You try something and you are successful at it, you feel good about it, you do more of it, right? So you
Right.
see
Right.
that
Mm-hmm.
escalation in this movie depicted really, really well. So yeah, great watch. Glad you put it on the list.
Yeah, I will say too, for folks who haven't seen it yet, or if you're seeking the film out, I do feel the director's cut, which is a couple minutes longer, is
Mm,
actually a lot stronger because of it gets a lot more graphic with the rape scene, and I think it's really important to see the impact that action has on the victim, and it makes it you kind of immediately understand where the film's going a lot faster than the way that the theatrical cut had to go. It's a subtle difference, and it makes the film a lot harder of a watch because it really focuses on the horror of the act he committed. But I do feel that it immediately makes you distance yourself from Kevin Bacon's character, which I think the studio at the time was too worried that like early on in the film you still want to root for him as a hero some way before he turns, and that was too early in the film
mm,
for him to quote unquote turn. But I think leaving that in actually makes it, again, the point of the film for me is that he never turned. It was just he realized who he actually was through the escalation, like you were mentioning earlier. So I would
mhm,
just
mhm.
recommend if folks haven't seen this film, or stayed away from it because Verhoeven himself does not like the final output, that they try to track down the director's cut edition if they're seeking it out. But
Interesting. Yeah, he's an interesting one. There's a little bit of, and I'm not a completist on all his movies, and I haven't seen a lot of them in a while,
mhm,
so I can't make like a more researched argument. But there's a little bit of kind of titillation that
mhm,
he is drawn to,
mhm,
which maybe you could say that is the point, and he's probably doing that to kind of question the audience, and put them in sort of that moral dilemma that, oh, are you now part of this as well?
mhm,
But at the same time, you can't help but not question his intentions as well. And
mhm.
that's sort of, it's interesting, but it's
Yeah.
also a little bit creepy. Like Elle, the
Oh yeah.
Bear
Brilliant film.
movie,
Yeah.
which is amazing, but I mean, that exactly deals with this whole
Mhm,
aspect.
mhm.
So yeah, there's more to unpack, I think, with Verhoeven.
Yeah, I
A
think that's what makes him.
complicated figure, I
Oh,
think.
for sure. I think that's what makes him and his films very interesting. But
Yeah.
so to wrap things up, what were the films that did not make it onto your list?
So I was thinking about the network as well,
Mm-hmm.
and Ace and the Hole, so that whole brand of
Mm-hmm.
movies, essentially. Um, I had a conversation
Oh, okay. Nice.
on the list, and I think that's sort of it. Yeah. What
Mm.
about you?
Yeah, I didn't have a lot of other ones either, because I guess that's a good thing. We don't have a lot of fears. But John Carpenter's They Live,
Mm,
two Cameron movies, The Abyss and Terminator 2, and then a documentary film called Overnight, which is
mm,
about the filming of Boondock Saints, and it is just an incredible,
mm.
yeah, it's an incredible documentary about how egomaniacal people can be. Those are the four that did not make my list.
All right. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this episode, or were at least provoked by it. If not, fearful, thinking about your own fears. But we all hope that you have a safe and happy Halloween. And review us, like us, subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. And until next time, see you soon.
Goodbye.